Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Chris Clark, and today we're going to talk about application modernization of ABF and OpenROAD applications. We'll also cover what's new in OpenROAD 11.2. So this is our normal disclaimer. If you see anything on here you want to reuse for your purposes, reach out to marketing or myself. And again, anything on here is subject to change. So today, really have two items to cover. What do modern applications look like, and how do I get there? So thank you again for spending your time with me the next 30 minutes. As you know, the title of this presentation, it's not a huge stretch to guess that you actually have OpenROAD and or ABF applications. Your applications are definitely customized for your use case and needs. And knowing our partners and customers, they almost certainly have a very meaningful and real world impact. You can't buy off-the-shelf software to do what you do, and you want to expose this to the web somehow. And starting from scratch really is not an option. You have a massive investment that you've already made. You've got decades of development years invested in it, and it handles all those use cases. So you really want to reuse rather than rewrite. So today, users expect web applications. Desktop applications are not dead. I personally will still continue to use the desktop versions of Word, PowerPoint, and Office, even though I will sometimes also use the cloud versions. Cloud versions are easier to deploy. Training can often be easier, and they're accessible from anywhere. Web apps can help reduce deployment costs as well as being easier to deploy. Web services are out there, and there's probably some web services that you actually want to use, and that gives you more chances to integrate. Either you access other people's web services, and there are all sorts of standards for that, JSON RPC, REST interfaces over HTTPS, using a variety of payloads like XML or JSON. And partners also expect access to your business logic via web services. Maybe it's an external partner, maybe it's an internal department. And you need to be able to expose those quickly. And this applies whether this is on-premise or in the cloud. So this is not a cloud presentation. This is focused on ABF and OpenROAD. Again, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. But the cloud has become something that's become more prevalent this year. We've seen a large uptick in the number of cloud deployments for both ActianX, Ingress, and OpenROAD. And I'm fielding a lot more questions about how to make that journey with both the Ingress and ActianX DBMS and also OpenROAD applications. And there's interest in both cloud and co-location centers. We did a survey, and 30% of responders this year said they were actually interested in moving to the cloud. There's the typical reasons for that. You don't want to have to maintain a power supply, an uninterruptible power supply. You don't want to have to muck around with multiple internet providers so that you've got resilience. You pay someone to make those problems go away. However, COVID last year brought in new challenges. We're seeing many businesses closing some of their physical locations, and I've actually got friends whose businesses are doing really well, but they made the decision to close all their physical locations. Just last month, I was talking to a partner, and one of their customers needed some work done, and most of the time they can do that remotely, but they needed physical access to the space, and during an extended shelter in place, they weren't able to get access to the customer site. If you've got questions and are interested in cloud deployments, our services team would love to talk to you. I'm happy to talk to you about that too, so please reach out. So we have partners who've successfully migrated ABF and their business logic in ABF to OpenROAD. We've also seen some projects that have failed. Early adopters have been able to get web applications and web services out there exposing their OpenROAD business logic. It has required some significant effort. Our partners and our services team have been successful in getting OpenROAD and the Ingress applications to the cloud. And we spent a lot of time talking to partners and customers, looking at what's worked, what hasn't worked, what are the best strategies, and how do you get your business logic moved. We've made some changes and some enhancements to OpenROAD so that A, it's either possible or easier or faster. We've identified some best practices as well as some practices that are best to be avoided that will minimize the risk and give you a better chance of being successful. OpenROAD 11.2 has some new features, and we're going to talk about those in more detail, and some of those even build on features added in OpenROAD 6.2. And we are focused on documenting these best practices in a modernization guide to give you a framework. So we're providing both tools and a framework to modernize applications, and we'll get into some more details soon. If you've not looked at web development for OpenROAD and getting your business logic exposed, now is a great time to do so. You get to capitalize on the experiences and best practices that other people have gone through, as well as the new features that are available today in OpenROAD. So some of the challenges we see out there is that people don't always have OpenROAD skills. If you happen to have ABF skills already, then you're 80% of the way there, because those language experiences just translate straight to OpenROAD. If you don't have any of those experiences, then training is the best option you have. And as well as the usual instructor-led training, we now offer via Actian Academy self-led training. All our training material is online, and you can take it at your own pace. This is part of your regular license. It's no additional cost. And we've already had some partners take fresh graduates from college and university, run them through this training course, and within the week be able to make productive changes to real applications. We've seen projects fail or get close to failure when they've tried to do too much. You don't need to boil the ocean. The plan is to do incremental modernization. You don't have to do all the apps, and you should focus on apps that actually matter, the things that people are actually using. So pick small projects or small parts of projects to be successful. A quick internal use case, we have a bug system, and the biggest case we saw for that was doing read-only lookups. It was a green screen application, so we developed a web-based read-only viewer, super simple. We were able to do that in a few days, and then that was able to be used in production. And then we then start to look at other small pieces of that application that we could expose. For people who actually were using web services and web applications, they were investing a lot of time in SCPs, or service call procedures, with wrappers, dealing with subclasses, inheritance, as well as having to write wrapper functions in C# or Java, depending on what their other team was using. So the JSON RPC support removes the need for all of that. It exposes the logic you already have that's already in a procedure and makes it easy to expose that. If you don't already have web service skills or web application skills, that's actually not an issue to get you started. OpenROAD 11.2 removes the need for that with the JSON RPC feature and WebGen, which we'll talk about some more in a minute. You don't need to have those basic skills. You can start to develop and be an effective web developer using your existing OpenROAD skills. Moving ABF logic to OpenROAD is tedious, and again, people have been successful doing this, but it was a tedious process. For the most part, it was essentially copying and pasting code from ABF into OpenROAD, and whilst that was successful, it was slow and laborious. OpenROAD 11.2 has two tools that help with that. We can import forms straight into OpenROAD, as well as taking in some parts of the metadata from ABF. For example, record types, those map exactly to user classes in OpenROAD. And previously that you'd have to do that manually. We have a tool that will automate that entire process, and it's not vulnerable to copy and paste mistakes. Similarly for source code, we can take in some of the source code, so you don't have to physically copy and paste that. And finally, partitioning applications to separate your UI and your business logic takes time. And unfortunately, there's no way around this. It does take time. In addition, you do need skills. The people working on this need to understand your business and how your application works to be successful. So this is an overview of the process. You may not use all the parts of this. You only use a small piece of this, and we're going to cover some of these stages later on. If you're dealing with ABF, you don't need to make changes to that frame. You can import those frames into OpenROAD. It's a push of a button, and you don't need to make manual changes while getting that initial screen. Where possible, we've done automation, but some manual work is required. But the idea here is to avoid rewriting business logic. So we can bring stuff in and use it whenever we can, as is, but there are times when you are going to have to do partitioning, and again, we'll delve into that into some more in a minute. Yeah, and finally, getting a web application is easy with WebGen because you can take your 4GL application and transpile it or convert it using that. And again, web services are made available via JSON RPC by taking your existing procedures and simply making web versions of those. So now we're going to get into talking about the process and the stages that you actually go through. You start at the top and work your way through. So the first thing you need to do is, agree with your stakeholders what you're going to do, and everyone should be involved in this, especially the users who are going to be doing this. You want to start setting some deadlines, and form a checklist of things to review. We have in our modernization guide the checklist to follow, so we're not going to go into all that today, but a couple of examples that you might want to think about. Freeze development on your ABF applications. Don't put any more time into moving those forwards with new functionality. Focus that on OpenROAD in moving it and also extending it in OpenROAD. The plan here is to reuse all your business logic. You don't want to rewrite it. It's an incremental process. And then, again, I'm assuming that you want to expose your business logic as a web service. And once you have that web service, you can then deploy browser-based applications. The other thing I want to go over is a quality engineering process. If you don't have a good engineering process in place, you will jeopardize a successful project. And again, you want to get something out quickly. You don't want this to take months. This should take weeks or ideally days. So set some targets. And focus on small applications, and we'll now talk about how you do that in the next couple of slides. But for the final slide on cloud, if you are interested in the cloud, I don't want to get into this in too much detail because it is mostly about ABF and OpenROAD modernization, but there are a couple of best practices to be aware of, and again, we'd love to talk to you about this in detail. Moving the database to the cloud is straightforward. You can bring your own license, and you can either use a co-location, you can move a machine, you can use a virtual machine, or even a cloud provider. Next presentation following actually has more notes on that, and we have some KB docs, and we're currently working on some new Actian Academy sessions that go into this in more detail. While you're moving the database, it's actually worth moving the FRS-based applications, like ABF and Embedded C, at the same time, and you can lift and shift those at the same time as the database. If you have any questions about your application and whether or not it's going to work over the internet or over a WAN, my recommendation is move the client applications as well. There's a very good chance that your application wasn't designed to have latency in place between the database and the client, so move the applications at the same time. There are tools that will help with that migration, and again, latency is a big issue across the WAN, so you don't want to run things like an X Windows application, X11. The X11 protocol is not suitable for that environment. Again, there are tools that can deal with that. Moving applications at the same time means that you can avoid having to deal with a VPN setup between your cloud or co-location and your client machines. And finally, things like Azure Remote Desktop or RDS. It's a great option for Windows applications that essentially uses your web browser as a remote desktop client. So you can move your Windows application to the cloud and still access them, but using a web browser. The downside is cost of that. Azure's RDS is extremely easy to use and set up, but it's not free. It does have additional costs attached to it. There are other alternatives. Apache Guacamole is a good one. It's cheap. It's actually free, but the setup costs are, you have to put more time into it. And if you're looking at costs, length of hosting time is also worth looking at. You're going to get a better deal the longer you are committed to that. So now actually getting into the detail of what you do. So the first thing is you need to find the source code for OpenROAD and or ABF. So look in your source code control system. If you do not have source code control, then you can use OpenROAD and ABF to access the metadata database, find the location, and then dump and export the code and the frames. If you're not using a source code control system, that's one of your first tasks, and we are definitely going to talk about that in some more detail in a minute. Once you've got your source code, you should make sure that it actually matches the application you have in production. In case you found the old version, make sure you find the latest version. And at the same time, you want to locate the tests. That's both test plans and actual test scripts and test data. This is the point where you actually have to engage with your users. Your users are the ones who actually know what they're using the application for and how often. We've had a partner who actually worked with their customers, and they found that there was a number of pieces of the application that was heavily and actively used. There are also large parts that weren't used anymore. So find out what's already used. You don't want to migrate and move code that isn't used. You want to incrementally modernize. So identify the most used pieces of that application, and also audit the application source code to find small applications that are good for proof of concepts. Again, with the modernization guide, we have some scripts and tools that can help you determine that. And once you've got sizes, you can actually start looking for smaller projects because they're going to be faster to move, because you're looking for some quick wins, build some confidence and some experience and demonstrate success. Single frame applications are your best bet. They're really easy to move. They have fewer connecting pieces. And again, you want to be looking at results in a few days, maybe weeks rather than months. You want to avoid the big bang approach. You don't want to boil the ocean. Converting everything at once is going to take a long time, and you run the risk of failure. So if you have some good source code control systems in place, you're already in a good spot. If you're not, this is the time to look at that. If you find out if your team are happy with what they have, and if they're not, you can look at improving it or just polishing it. If you are not using a source code control system today, you need to have one in place. If you are not able to revert changes in a few minutes, that's going to slow you down. Mistakes are going to happen. You're going to do testing. You're going to catch problems. So you need to be able to revert changes if you can and go back in time. The recommendation is Git. It's what we use here at Actian, and you can use that same source code control system for both ABF and OpenROAD. So that's for the forms and the source code, and for OpenROAD, that's all the forms and frames and source code as well. For OpenROAD, we specifically recommend doing a component export. They're easier to partition and manage across different people, so you can have multiple developers editing different components, and they're easier to merge. It's not the only option, but we do provide some scripts to help follow that approach, and it's actually what we do internally at Actian. We'd love to talk to you about this if you have questions or concerns. We have partners who have a slightly different approach, but the key is XML imports into a source code control system. And again, if our approach doesn't suit your team, we can find one that does, maybe by stealing things from partners who have already got projects and processes they're happy with. I also recommend doing code reviews, and code reviews are not just about improving the quality of the code at that time under review. It's a great way to onboard new team members, either to help teach them the process, the application, or even the language if they're new to the language. So we highly encourage code reviews, and again, there are tools out there to help you with that. And again, we'd love to tell you about what we use internally at Actian. And I'm going to repeat this: freeze development on your ABF applications. Treat that as a read-only code base and make your changes in OpenROAD moving forward. Focus your time and energy on the OpenROAD versions. Last slide on engineering principles. Testing. I probably don't have to convince you that testing is important, and I don't think it's controversial that, or new information. Testing has to happen at all stages, and the biggest time sink I've seen is manual tests. If you haven't updated your tests to be automated, now is the time to do so. And ideally, make those tests part of your build process. Run it under CI, continuous integration. There are different kinds of tests you might be looking at, and the obvious one is the GUI one. If you have an OpenROAD application, it's a desktop application, it's GUI, then GUI tests are probably the first thing you think of. And Test Complete from SmartBear is what we use internally at Actian. All our OpenROAD patches go through that test suite. The other one we use are headless tests, which are unit tests. These are assertion-based, and we have a framework which you can pull down from GitHub. It's what we use again at Actian, and it's where most of our tests are. It's headless, so it runs really fast. You don't need to start up a GUI, and you can test most of your business logic by doing that. It's a more effective way than GUI testing for testing business logic. For web services, we actually recommend using the same unit test framework. You can actually use the same code and logic to exercise that business logic over a web service. If you already have web service test frameworks you like and are familiar with, like Postman, then obviously use those, continue to use those and extend those. Similarly, if you have a stress testing suite that you like, if you love Locust for some reason, carry on using it. It's a great tool. It does exactly what it's supposed to. So carry on using those tools. For web applications, again, if you have a favorite web application test suite or framework, please use that. We've adopted the robot framework in the OpenROAD engineering team. It works well for our practices. And again, we're happy to tell you how we've done that if you've got specific details and questions. And I'm going to repeat this again. Testing happens at all stages. You need a test database to run this against. Ideally, it's a separate test installation, but at the very minimum, a test database is required. So partition the code. This is where you actually separate your UI from the business logic. This is where you should spend most of your effort. This is where your developers actually get to do some engineering. For ABF, if you're coming from ABF, use the automated tools wherever you can to import content from ABF. So for forms, that's the ABF to OR. For record types, global variables and constants, use ABF component to OR, that's ABF comp to OR. That will also import your ABF source code into OpenROAD in a commented out fashion. So all those components are buildable, and then you can extract what you need inside of OpenROAD using OpenROAD development tools to partition and refactor. The aim here is to move to a stateless process. So your business logic is going to be in multiple SQL statements, but inside a single transaction. And at this point, you're not going to touch the ABF application, so it can carry on still running, and you're going to leave the database schema alone. So the ABF application continues to run as it did before. If you're already in OpenROAD, you only have to focus on the partitioning. And again, it's about breaking up stages so that into one single transaction. If you have simple procedures, you can move those into a database procedure, but most of the time your business logic is probably complicated enough where it deserves to be in a 4GL procedure. And again, write unit tests. Every time you partition something, there should be some unit tests to test that logic out. If you're not sure what test to use, consult your test plan. You've probably got test data and test scripts in there already. You just need to transplant them into a unit test. And again, consult our modernization document. There's a lot more detail here than this one slide can cover. So use that as your guide. Once you've partitioned your application, you actually have procedures that can then be exposed as web services. And with JSON config for app, you simply point at your database of procedures, and you can choose what you want to expose and then deploy them to your web server. It's a very simple process, and you compile your application, deploy it to the OpenROAD server, and at this point, any client that supports JSON RPC can consume and use your web service. So that might be a web application that your team and a separate team uses, or it might even be a pure web browser-based application that's written by hand. However, you don't need to write web applications by hand if you're an OpenROAD developer, because with OpenROAD WebGen in 11.2, you can take your partitioned applications, compile them to HTML and JavaScript, and deploy to your desktop browsers, mobile web browsers. There's a follow-on session from Don who covers how this works and how to do that. But again, because it's an OpenROAD application, you can continue to deploy using your traditional OpenROAD runtime or even load and run, as well as mobile. So this is going to rely on all your previous testing, and you can use the same tools. It's the workbench for doing application development as well as debugging, and so you get to continue to use the same tools you're already familiar with. For deployment, use Tomcat, and that's actually for both the web services, that's the JSON RPC hosted, as well as the web applications, which is the HTML and the JavaScript files. At this point, you can make use of non-OpenROAD servers to make web service calls to those. So that includes JSON RPC or even HTTPS over REST. So how do you get started? Well, the first thing I encourage you to do is to automate your tests. Again, the biggest thing we've seen is manual testing. That's going to sink all your time. You need to avoid manual testing whenever you possibly can. You can't get away from it. Manual testing is still a useful thing to do, but you should automate whenever you can. Again, unit tests are my recommendation for focus there, because you can test your business logic there and it's fast, but also look at testing the GUI, whether that's your traditional desktop application or something in the web. You can take your existing procedures and expose them as web services without making any code changes. So if you have those already, check out JSON config for app. If you're working with another team or partners that are using JSON RPC, then you can make calls to those from OpenROAD, and obviously they can make calls to you if you've exposed things via JSON config for app. We have some samples on GitHub under OpenROAD JSON, and some good examples for multiple languages. So how to do things from curl on the command line, from Python, from C#, from Java. But any language that supports HTTP and JSON can now make calls to OpenROAD. You can try accessing REST services from inside of OpenROAD, whether the payload's JSON or XML. So check out the new URL connection class. That's a new feature in OpenROAD 11.2, which is coming out soon. We're currently running a beta program, so if you are interested in this, I can get you immediate access if you get in contact with me. We'll get you signed up. If you're trying to get an application from ABF into OpenROAD, take a look at both ABF to OR for the form and ABF comp to OR for components. Again, this is part of 11.2, coming soon. And again, if you want early access, please contact me. You can create web applications using your partitioned application using WebGen. We have some demos online. Again, it's on GitHub. And again, the following presentation from Dawn is going to cover that in more detail. So if you're an engineer and want to know how some of that is going to work, check out his session that's coming up. And finally, the modernization guide. Check that out for the process and the checklist to go through. That's going to be a living document for 11.2, but again, that's a good starting point. If things are not as easy as I'm claiming, I want to know about it. So I really want you to give these tools a go. We're very happy with the progress we've made, and we want you to start using them. We've spent a long time working on these tools to make it either easier or just possible to upgrade and modernize. And finally, come talk to us. If you've got questions, you want to share what you're up to, ask for input and advice, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you for joining me today. This is my email address. You're welcome to give me a call, an email, and we will follow up with you later on. And happy to have you have a chat with the engineering team.